Since this show launched in October 2020, we have taken great pains to cover the growing extremism of the Republican Party at the national level on voting rights, abortion, COVID, guns, policing, and all of the fake culture wars. But there is one state where Republicans have turned the dial up to 11 on all of those issues, where the GOP simply bypasses half their state's voting population to consolidate power and beta test their next extreme policy makeover. And we are dedicating the entirety of this episode of the show to that state.
Now, don't argue. This is Florida. The rules are different here.
Yes, Florida. It gave us Disney World, Miami Vice, Burt Reynolds, and countless legends about Florida man. But it also gave us Bush v. Gore, Stand Your Ground, Choose Life license plates, Donald Trump, the MAGA bomber, Cesar Sayoc, and more January the 6th defendants than any other state. And today, it seems that every time a new culture war talking point magically appears in the mouths of Fox hosts, every time a new piece of Republican culture war legislation pops up in multiple states, it seems like it was just exported from or is being exploited in Florida. The state's new high priest of grievance politics is Governor Ronald Dion DeSantis, a Harvard and Yale-educated populist. DeSantis rode the Tea Party wave into Congress, then he rode the Trump wave into the governor's mansion, and now he's trying to make right-wing waves of his own that might be big enough to get him into the Oval Office.
Disney will pay its debts. Disney will, for the first time, actually live under the same laws as everybody else in Florida.
We believe in education, not indoctrination. The genderbread man. Parents do not want this going on in their schools. We are not going to tell some kindergartner that they're an oppressor based on their race and what may have happened 100 or 200 years ago. This will represent the most significant protections for life that have been enacted in this state in a generation.
On Tuesday in Tallahassee, DeSantis sort of admitted it was time to move on when asked if he accepted Joe Biden as the president-elect.
It's not for me to do.
So they got to try to find a boogeyman. Maybe it's that there are black helicopters circling the Department of Health. If you believe that, I got a bridge in Brooklyn I'd like to sell you.
Remember all that? In just over 3 years as governor, DeSantis has tried to stay one step ahead of his party with theatrical demagoguery and red meat legislation for the right. Just this spring, DeSantis and the state GOP used the moral panic over quote-unquote critical race theory to push through the country's first law restricting workplace and school discussions about race that might make people, white people, uncomfortable. A law that led to the banning of more than a dozen grade school math textbooks in the state until they were scrubbed of woke content.
You do have things like social and emotional learning and some of the other things that are more political in there. Math is about getting the right answer.
Expert mathematician there, Ron DeSantis. Florida Republicans also passed the Don't Say Gay law, banning school discussions of gender and sexual orientation. When critics called the bill a government overreach, a top DeSantis spokeswoman called them groomers of children, or pro-groomer. That's what she described the critics as. And after Disney, one of the state's largest employers, joined in the criticism, DeSantis led a GOP war on the entertainment empire, signing a law to strip Disney of its special tax status and potentially putting Florida taxpayers on the hook for hundreds of millions of dollars. All of this builds on an authoritarian streak that DeSantis indulged last year in signing the first law in the nation that would give immunity to some motorists who run down protesters on the street. That was the Florida GOP reaction to the Black Lives Matter protests, and it became a model for legislation in other states, as ever.
If a local government tries to defund the police, we at the state can stop that. We're able to put people in jail if they riot. We also have provisions to prevent mob intimidation tactics, and I think it's probably the most comprehensive piece of law and order legislation I've seen.
DeSantis was also ahead of the GOP curve in his vehement denials of COVID science, touting his anti-mask, even anti-vaccine mandate policies as a panacea for a COVID-racked nation and chiding teens who wore masks in front of him, browbeating them for, quote, COVID theater.
You got a lot of people in your profession who waxed poetically for weeks and weeks about how Florida was going to be just like New York. Wait 2 weeks, Florida's going to be next. Just like Italy, wait 2 weeks. Well, hell, we're 8 weeks away from that, and it hasn't happened.
That was May 2020. That aged so well because as of yesterday, more than 74,000 Floridians have died of COVID under Ron DeSantis. That's more than double his margin of victory when he was elected governor. Of course, DeSantis and Florida Republicans have taken steps to make this purplish state permanently red, from keeping felons disenfranchised against the will of state voters, even Republican voters, to passing new restrictions to voter access, creating an election police force, yes, and letting DeSantis draw up new gerrymandered congressional maps. But this show isn't just about Ron DeSantis. It's about what made the election of a Ron DeSantis possible in a blue wave election year in a state where registered Democrats outnumbered Republicans by more than 250,000 in 2018. It's about how Republicans have morphed Florida's state house into a permanent rubber stamp for the state's governors, all of whom in this century have been Republicans, even though this state voted twice for Barack Obama. You want to know how weak the Democratic opposition is in this evenly divided state? The frontrunners to challenge DeSantis for governor later this year are Florida's only current statewide elected Democrat and a former Republican governor who switched to the Dems. This all happened by design, a quarter century of conservative design. The GOP has long made Florida a playground for big donors and a testing ground for conservative political experiments. Can you maintain your party's control of a state with a narrow majority of votes? Can you govern with culture war legislation and still stay in power? Even before the most famous Florida man descended from that Trump Tower escalator in 2015, Floridians knew the answer to all these questions was yes. So if you want a picture of where America might be headed, a bitterly divided country facing the rollback of basic rights while real problems go unaddressed, you have to look at Florida. The Sunshine State matters because what happens in Florida doesn't stay in Florida. Think about this. The next Republican presidential nominee, perhaps the next President of the United States, is one of two men who currently reside in Florida. Joining me now are three Floridians. Rick Wilson, former Republican strategist, co-founder of the anti-Trump Lincoln Project, and author of Running Against the Devil, a plot to save America from Trump and Democrats from themselves. Also here is Fernand Amandi, Democratic pollster and host of the Strange Days podcast. He's also an MSNBC political analyst. And my fellow Peacock host, Katie Phang, host of The Katie Phang Show. She's also an MSNBC legal contributor. Welcome, all of you. Let me start with a very blunt question. Guys, why is Florida? Why is it like this? Katie, you can go first.
Because when it comes to autocratic tendencies, Ron DeSantis says, hold my beer, and he says, I can outdo you. I have jokingly yet seriously always said that Florida is the epicenter of all things that I can't really say without getting bleeped out. It is a very sad state of affairs that we are leading the charge in an ability to be able to get rid of any type of freedoms that you would want to exercise. I am the mother of a first grader. She is 7 years old. There is a lot of stuff that I fear for her, but it mainly stems from what happens in Florida. It is a mind-boggling situation, Mehdi, because if you look at just what was on your screen right now, we have Rick and Fernand and me. You have big voices in Florida that are efforting to make change, and yet we're hitting a wall, a big red GOP wall, and it's not for any lack of trying. And so ultimately what you have to do is realize that Florida is a microcosm of what is happening on a more national level. We have DeSantis-appointed judges. We have DeSantis redistricting. We have DeSantis laws. We have DeSantis going after Disney, which is one of the largest employers in the state of Florida. And so what we try to do is we try to grassroots it. And I know that Fernand and Rick can speak to this more. But from a legal perspective, we have massive challenges that go before DeSantis-appointed judges, and we have problems.
So, Rick, let me bring you in. You know Republicans. Are Florida's Republicans really, really out there, even by modern GOP standards? And if so, why? Is it because people like yourself riled them up over the years?
You bet. We built a machine in Florida politics. And I go back to the dawn of time in Florida politics in 1988 in the first George Herbert Walker Bush campaign. And I've been around the block here for a long time, done a ton of races in my home state. I'm a fifth-generation Floridian. And what has happened in Florida is there are three big factors that have affected it. One, the Republicans built a plan back in 1994 to destroy the Democratic Party of Florida, to wreck their farm teams, to cut off their fundraising, to drive them into small enclaves in the state. And it was a successful plan. It was executed on brilliantly. Second thing is Florida has become less Florida. A lot of older white retirees have moved here from Wisconsin, from Ohio, from Pennsylvania. They were getting out of the expensive north and moving to the inexpensive south. And they are the folks who hated the high taxes, the social safety net stuff. And they were driven here in many cases because they felt their states were becoming too ethnic. This state, the final factor is that we are now the petri dish of MAGA conservatism. There is a critical mass here of crazy people who live down, and a lot of them moved since Trump, but they now are using the state as their laboratory for MAGA extremism, and it's found a fertile base here.
So on that note, Fernand, let me ask you this. Do you feel like you're living in that petri dish that Rick mentioned? Because you've got Rick Scott, Republican Senator Rick Scott, former governor of your state, who's now the only Republican senator even putting a plan on the table. Mitch McConnell says he won't offer a Republican agenda. And yet even at the national level, you have the guy from Florida, Rick Scott, offering a plan for the party, voter ID, denying the existence of trans children, Pledge of Allegiance in schools, raising taxes on poorest Americans. That's all out there from Rick Scott. So even at a national level, Florida Republicans are leading the charge. That's where you are right now, Fernand.
Well, Mehdi, I mean, there's a reason that the new GOP meme and the Republican meme is Make America Florida, because as you've heard Rick and Katie talk about, and as you did very eloquently in your opening, this is a by design plan. And as a Florida Democrat, it pains me to admit this, but the facts of the matter are, Mehdi, that the Republicans wanted it more. They made a calculation that Florida was a state that could not, under any circumstances, be lost and be part of the Democratic coalition of states going forward. And as Rick says, they made that plan in '94. They nonetheless still lost Florida in '96 when Bill Clinton won re-election. They made everything in their power to win it back in 2000 in that disputed election where many, including myself, think it was taken away. But nonetheless, the Democrats continued to get complacent and treat Florida as an election year prize, where the Republicans thought about Florida as a generational prize. Yep. They've treated it as a permanent campaign, 24/7, 365. They think about it in terms of 5 election cycles ahead. The Democrats treat Florida as 5 months ahead of an election, if that. And the results are what they are.
Well,